COCOON's premise sounds mind-bendingly complex. You move between various worlds, which at the same time exist within small orbs you can carry around. To make progress, you have to bring these worlds inside other worlds, rearranging their hierarchy on the fly. This concept hadn't really been done before, so turning it into a fun game was a formidable challenge. How do you prevent players from becoming frustrated and overwhelmed with such a brain-twisting concept? The key lies in the control scheme. It turned COCOON into one of the best games of the year. On its own, COCOON's premise of managing world within world to solve puzzles seems pretty daunting. It gets truly crazy when you realize every orb houses a boss to beat, each of which has its own unique mechanic. And that beating a boss also unlocks a special power of its orb that you use to traverse the various worlds and later have to combine to make progress. To explain these complicated mechanics, other games would bombard you with dialogue boxes or force you to study an in-game manual by heart. Not COCOON. Outside of the menus, COCOON doesn't feature a single spoken or written word. There's no NPC to hold your hand or hint system to guide you. If you're stuck, you're stuck. That begs the question, how do you make a game with such an outlandish concept and zero handholding accessible for the general public? Well, the developer's solution to this problem is as simple as it is brilliant. The entirety of COCOON is controlled with the left stick and a single button. Such a limited control scheme is a rare sight in video games this mechanically complex. Most developers fit as many inputs as they can on a controller. But the choice to deliberately limit the player's inputs is not surprising if we take a look at who is responsible for COCOON's design. The game comes from the mind of Danish developer Jeppe Carlsen. He is best known as the lead gameplay designer of Playdead, where he built the puzzles of the genre-defining puzzle platformers LIMBO and Inside. Playdead's games are very straightforward. They use the joystick to move, a button to jump, and a button to interact with objects. For COCOON, Carlsen took an even more minimalistic approach, sticking to a single button for the entire game. This decision comes from his fascination with game mechanics. Carlsen says he always puts gameplay first and builds his games around strong gameplay ideas. That is something he couldn't fully commit to at Playdead, as he was just one part of a bigger team. So while he was developing Limbo, he started working on his own project in his spare time, with, as he calls it, uncompromising game design. The two games he published independently revealed the seeds of his design philosophy that would eventually lead to COCOON. His first game, 140, is a rhythm-based puzzle platformer. You make your way through the levels by timing your jumps to the music of Jacob Schmidt, another former Playdead employee who would end up creating COCOON's soundtrack. Just like COCOON, there are no tutorials. 140 wordlessly teaches you how to play. Just like COCOON, you only use a stick and a button. And just like COCOON, the game slowly introduces mechanics around this minimalistic control scheme, including a boss battle at the end of every stage. 140 was met with critical acclaim, and after the release of Inside, Carlsen decided to leave Playdead to be able to work on his own projects full-time. Another platformer was out of the question. He wanted to make a twin-stick shooter. While most games in that genre are a frantic mix of adrenaline-pumping music and high-score chasing, Carlsen took a different approach. He created Thoth, a deconstruction of the twin-stick shooter genre. There is no point system or leaderboards, flashy visuals are replaced with simple shapes and colors, and instead of in-your-face EDM, Thoth features an unnerving, almost menacing soundtrack. As you'd expect from Carlsen, Thoth is a puzzle game at its core. You don't have to rely on lightspeed reflexes to beat the game. Figuring out how to deal with the ever-evolving mechanics the game throws at you is the key to success. And once again, Thoth's control scheme is as minimalistic as it gets. You move with the left stick and shoot with the right. That's it. So, we've established that a simple control scheme is an essential part of any of Jeppe Carlsen's games. Without it, they simply would not work as well as they do. But we haven't discussed why COCOON's minimal control scheme makes it such an amazing game. Well, limiting the controls this aggressively makes COCOON way easier to jump in. It removes a big barrier between you and the game and makes it easier to come to grips with its unique mechanics. As Carlsen himself puts it, the simplicity makes players forget about the controller immediately, so they can immerse themselves in our worlds and focus on the challenges. The key word here is simplicity. Simplicity is the crux of Carlsen's design philosophy and the DNA that runs through COCOON. When Carlsen started his career, puzzle difficulty was basically the only thing he cared about. If people were able to easily solve a puzzle, he considered it badly designed. Over the years, he grew out of that line of thinking. That's not to say COCOON doesn't have any brain-teasing puzzles, but Carlsen and his team started thinking beyond difficulty by mixing in puzzles that are deliberately simple to solve. These could communicate a theme about the world you're in, say something about the story. Some simply exist because they're fun. And remember how COCOON doesn't have any kind of traditional tutorial or hand-holding? Well, here the tutorials are interspersed throughout the game. They come in the form of puzzles that only exist to teach you about the new mechanic or rule of the game. They're simple on purpose, to prepare you for later, more interesting puzzles. Carlsen calls these thinking rooms. The whole point of the game is that I'm designing these rooms and trying to make them as accessible for you to figure out and get a little epiphany yourself. It's like I'm trying to design a room that is as suitable as possible for you to think and get the idea that I want you to get. This approach to game design does have some pitfalls. Because of its limited moveset, getting stuck in COCOON can become more frustrating than in other games, because there are so few ways to interact with its worlds. And having several worlds to explore at a time can feel overwhelming quickly. That is why the game quietly nudges you in the right direction at all times. For example, COCOON often locks you inside a room with a puzzle. That way, your options to solve the puzzle are limited to the room itself, which dramatically reduces its complexity. And when exploring in a new place, previous areas are quietly locked behind you, so you don't get frustrated backtracking to places that have no purpose left. COCOON also gives you subtle visual clues. During some parts, you're accompanied by a drone which has a lamp. The drone acts as a sort of guide, pointing you where to go next. If you're in the wrong world, it points to the nearest teleporter, and if there's danger nearby, it starts spinning like a siren. Even COCOON's music serves to help the player. When you've figured out the puzzle and are carrying out the steps to solve it, COCOON synths swell as a pat on the back from the developer that you've managed to figure it out. Carlsen's approach of valuing simplicity in the control scheme, the wordless tutorialization and the puzzle design over difficulty is what makes COCOON one of the best puzzle games in recent memory. The Danish developer sums it up like this. When I stopped asking myself, is this puzzle challenging enough, and instead asked, is this puzzle stimulating enough, COCOON became a much better game. If you're interested in more great indie games, check out this video on how Cassette Beast's design fixes the Pokemon formula. Don't forget to like this video if you've enjoyed it and let me know what you thought of COCOON in the comments. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time.